Hello, Podwalkers, and welcome to another episode of Goblin Lore. This episode, we are talking about the disaster on Ravnica, the War of the Spark that is coming, and how you can be prepared yourself to handle this impending, not to be dire or anything, but impending doom. And we have a special guest here with us to help us talk about this disaster preparedness, emergency preparedness, and disaster relief. And I'm going to let her introduce herself in just 1 second. But first, as we do with everybody and every episode, we have a burning inquiry to start the show. And that is, what is in your Magic the Gathering emergency bug-out bag?
My name is Renee. I am a emergency planner with different levels of government at different periods of time in my career. You can find me on Twitter at MTGWAR. I have also been playing Magic the Gathering for a very long time, and just about any other game known to man. And actually, gaming has helped me with my job immensely, just as much as anything else has. I think I'm finding a way to create like spark in a bottle so you can crack it open and planes walk away.
Just a break in case of emergency.
Yep. You are not a planeswalker. It's just like break. You don't know where you're going. You don't know what's happening. Anytime you do this, but you can just do it and go. You might walk into a bigger disaster. Who the heck knows?
You just have to make sure you have that in the fine print.
Yeah. Legal disclaimers.
Yep. Well, I'm Alex Newman, found on Twitter at AlexanderNewM. And so what's in my MTG emergency bug out bag? You know, I told everyone I was going to come up with a more serious answer, but I didn't today. So I'm just going to go with my goofy answer, and that would be a juju bubble, relevant to a recent episode about the legacy that we released. But come on, it has a cumulative upkeep, so it isn't good for long. But you can pour a lot of mana into it and get life back. So in case of emergency, I can get a bunch of life, just out of nowhere. Seems like a good, quick thing to pop and use in a case of emergency.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. That is something that it's not like you're you won't use it in like a get lost in the wilderness sort of situation. This isn't in like your camping kit, but it is like a, oh no, the worst is about to happen. Crack this open. Good to go.
It's your go bag. Like, yeah. We're going to talk about those, but yeah, it's what you have to kind of get out and go, and you're going to drive to the next city over, or get on your whatever plane you're on's type of mobile. Maybe you have a Thopter drone. Who knows?
Oh yeah.
Oh, that'd be a good one. Yeah.
I guess the bummer would be is if you were in just like a total city plane like Ravnica, because then the next city over is just...
It's just more Ravnica.
It's just more Ravnica.
We're still here.
Well, there's like Wasteland outside of Ravnica.
That's true. The Rubble Belt is, they say that's one place to go.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go.
And I am Joe Redeman. You can find me on Twitter at Findhorn. That's Fynd Horn. And I really want to be serious also, but I'm not going to be. I've got I'll be real honest here. I've got a bag of 1.5 pounds of gummy bears sitting right next to me right now. And I'm trying real hard and failing to find any reason to not have that as part of my emergency go kit.
You can use gummy bears to have impromptu puppet shows.
Yep. Entertainment.
Yeah, no, I mean that's something that is totally valid. Is snacks and especially things that'll last a while, like gummy bears or any kind of like Cheetos or crackers. You can store them in your car.
Yeah, there you go.
In the real world. So if your car battery dies in the middle of winter, you're kind of okay. I mean, it's not the healthiest of foods. Definitely maybe have like some Planters peanuts somewhere or something, but at least it's something that's better than nothing. But it's also good for kids. Like, think of what kind of environment you'll be in and what kind of audience you're catering to. Like, maybe gummy bears are one of my favorites for sure, but I'm not thinking of them for puppet shows, but a parent might definitely that might be a concern for a elven parent on Ravnica that has to entertain their kids while they see the world crumble around them. So
right, absolutely, it's a delicious distraction, that's for sure.
And then you eat them and like, here, this is how we're all going to die. Right down the mouth of Mr. Bolus over there.
Well, that's a perfect pivot in my mind to move from a lovely lighthearted topic to our real world discussion. And longtime listeners of the show will note that we are kind of flipping the show order this time. We're still receiving, I don't want to make this sound too goofily, like this is the real world, but we are still receiving reports of what's happening on Ravnica as the show is being recorded, because the War of the Spark spoilers are still coming out. So we're not entirely sure of the full extent of Ravnica, but we do have a lot of stuff to talk about for the real world. Due to your expertise, Renee, there's a lot to dig into about what we do with disasters in the world, whether it's a natural disaster, a man-made disaster, what we can do with emergency preparedness for ourselves, what the impact of all that stuff is on a theoretical level. There's a lot to dig into. So we want to devote the majority of the episode to that to start with. And I think maybe the broadest question to ask is, what is emergency preparedness?
So emergency preparedness in the broadest term is the ability to be prepared for and respond to any type of disaster. Now, when you hear the word disaster, you're thinking your large-scale hurricanes or earthquakes or any kind of active shooter type incident, but that's not necessarily just all the things that we think about. A disaster starts and ends at the local level. So even though what everyone sees on the national news is your kind of stuff that happens with FEMA, at least in the United States, and then other agencies around the world, what really happens is you have your local responders, your fire, your police, your mayor's offices, your public works. They're responding. And even those guys are secondary responders. Typically, your first responders are actually citizens. So the goal of emergency response in a lot of cases is or emergency preparedness in a lot of cases, is really to get out there and inform the public how they can best handle and respond to an emergency, whether it's a fire, a car accident, somebody having a heart attack, just anything that's in their community. It becomes a disaster once the community can't handle it. So once it becomes larger than that community's fire department or police department, or those two resources combined, being able to handle it, it goes to the next level. So whether that's a county or a township or a state, every government area is kind of organized differently. It goes to that next level. It then becomes bigger and bigger and goes up a level and up a level and up a level. In the United States, it goes through a bunch of declarations. You can have state emergency declarations. A lot of people are probably very familiar with those for flooding, hurricanes, winter storms. They're very common there.
We know about that here in Minnesota for sure.
Wildfires in California and the Southwest, that's pretty common. Landslides up in the Northwest in certain areas. So all of that kind of comes into effect. Where a lot of people don't necessarily think about is how they can do this on a daily basis.
Yeah, so, and I guess that's the next question here. That's perfect. Is what do we do individually? Because what you're saying is, an emergency can become a disaster, but there are tons of myriad smaller potential emergencies around us on a day-to-day basis. Not to sort of blow it out of proportion for anybody who's got sort of anxiety about things. Like, I think even like you said, a car accident, you could be driving on your way home or on your way to work or to the grocery store or whatever, and just all of a sudden, you get T-boned, or something, a pothole happens and your car splats, but that's not a technical term, I'm sure, in the business, but but that sort of thing where there's much more mundane emergencies, right? So what can we do?
Even if you're the person who witnesses something like that, just calling 911 and knowing how to respond somewhat calmly is really important. Knowing what to pay attention for. The advent of cell phones is great because everyone can respond just about all the time. But your cell phone is this very finicky thing. So sometimes you'll get bumped over to the wrong county because of the GPS locations. So when the 911 call taker is asking for where you're at, make sure that you're trying to give them a street sign or a road that you're on, if it's a major highway, and what direction you're heading or what exit you've just passed. That's come in really big handy. In Delaware, where I live, we have State Route 1, which is different than U.S. Highway Route 1. And they run about parallel to each other, except that U.S. Highway Route 1 doesn't hit Delaware at all. But it goes through Maryland, which is the next state over.
Oh, sure.
And then there is Kent County, Delaware, and Kent County, Maryland, and those two share a boundary. And I was on U.S. Route 1 and somehow bumped over to a 911 call taker in Kent County, Delaware, because that's where my cell phone is registered to. And I was like, yeah, I'm on Route 1. And they're like, but where? And I'm like, I don't know, it says mile marker like 30. And they're like, that's not on Route 1. That's like way up in Newcastle all the way. And I'm like, no, wrong state. Hold on.
Yeah.
So just, being aware of your surroundings is really important. Beyond that, CPR classes, any kind of free courses, a lot of your YMCAs will offer those types of items, or the American Red Cross will also offer them for a small fee, but they'll get you certified, and that can be really helpful with your work, because then you actually know how to use the defibrillation devices at your work. That can save somebody's life if they're having a heart attack. You can also then direct people to call 911 while you're administering the CPR or the AED, which is beyond helpful because a lot of people will actually just freeze during an emergency. People tend to think that everyone runs and scatters, and we found actually that people will just freeze and stop what they're doing and look for direction.
Yeah, so that's an interesting question too, I guess, is what do you recommend about how to kind of go through that, sort of doing, I guess, the mental reps of like preparing for an emergency situation. There's not really any way to like practice the shock of an actual emergency. You can do, I remember from being in Boy Scouts, we do CPR courses and sort of emergency preparedness type scenarios in sort of role play situations, but nothing really prepares you for that moment when somebody does, this happened at one of our summer camps where somebody does swing a hatchet and accidentally cuts the tip off their finger, and you see it and you go, oh crap, and you just feel every muscle tense up. So how would you recommend that somebody prepare mentally for those situations as well, you know?
So it's really hard to do, but the repetition is a really big portion of this. There's actually another emergency manager that's very well known in the community, Jay Anelli on Twitter, who's really big in the Vorthos community, like the Vorthos guy.
Of the Vorthos cast, yeah.
Yes, that guy. He's also an emergency manager. So him and I talk quite often about this kind of stuff. But to us, the biggest thing is kind of getting people into that mindset of getting into a routine of repetitions. Like, check your... do you know when to check your smoke alarms and smoke detectors?
I don't.
Every 6 months?
Yes. So the best time to do it is actually when we spring forward or fall back, because you're already having to reset your clocks. But now that people are not having to reset clocks because they're all automatic, people have forgotten.
Yeah.
But that's a really good time to do it, is just, when things are already changing, just go through and just check the batteries.
I'm now looking at the smoke alarm on my own wall, and I don't think I see the red light on. That's concerning me.
You might want to change the battery, or even take it off and look at the date on the back. If it's older than 10 years, it probably needs to be completely replaced.
Yikes.
That's
Yeah.
good to know too. At my work, just as a random story, and maybe it contributes. We're doing a big, just preparing for situations like active shooter or something. And one of the big things they talk about a lot is have a plan. Always have a plan. It's like our department has the plan figured out, and everybody's gone through it, and we all have to make sure that everybody knows what the plan is. And the sort of funny now, but not funny at the time, reason that all of this is happening at work is because we have like a storm alarm, and we've got the fire alarm. Well, there is an alarm for a situation like an active shooter or something, and it accidentally got triggered by the system in the middle of the workday, and no one knew why and what was going on. And so 1,500 people in our office are kind of freaking out, especially because there is a daycare on site. And so we have parents trying to get to the other building to get their kids out of the daycare and all of this other stuff. So it's like, okay, now we know, so our work was like, okay, now we know we need to have this all prepared and, do the education and make sure people understand how to respond to the instructions and what it will be like. I think just a month or two ago, they actually went through and they had a new message created, and they're like, multiple times, weeks beforehand, like, we are going to play this message, just listen to it so you know what it'll sound like. Nothing's going on. We're going to play this. And so we kind of just in the morning was like, okay. Then they even announced over the overhead, we are going to play this message. This is just so you are familiar with what it sounds like. In the event of an actual emergency, we would play it and it would be followed by instructions. And so it was getting to see a little bit of that preparedness at work it's been great just to see do it and have that in place at work, but also to have the idea of how that's done, how those preparations are put in place.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Then you have that awareness of what is going to happen in those moments. When it goes, then you go, oh, okay, this is that.
Yeah.
And Alex brings up an excellent point of that kind of self-advocacy. A lot of people don't realize what to be prepared for until something happens, like his work was kind of going through. But that doesn't mean that you can't go and ask your work or whoever's caring for your child during the day, whether it's another like home daycare or a school or even a university. You can go with your child and actually put them in charge of asking and getting that information, and kind of going through and finding that information out and coming up with a plan with the rest of your family once you have that information. The last thing you want to do, especially with schools, if there is an active shooter on site, is go to the school. The school is going to be on lockdown. There's going to be a lot of people around it. There's going to be a lot of controlled area. You're not going to really be able to get to the school, and more than most likely your child is going to be sent to a different location once they have been cleared. So just going to the school is going to get you caught up in traffic, and most likely going to get you sent to an area where your cell phone service is not going to be so great. So staying at home, waiting for instructions. If you know the area where they're going to try and send students, that might be a good place to go. Typically, schools have now gone to sending out messages as to when they're going to start busing students over to that location. A lot of work locations have now come up with this kind of plan as well, called continuity of operations. So if you have a main location where you work and then your office happens to have another location a little ways away, if there's something that happens during the day, they'll actually send you over to the other location. Just let your family know, hey, this is our other location. I'll let you know if something's going on. That way, they hear XYZ building on ABC block is on fire. They can know, hey, we're going to rendezvous over here. Just wait. Don't swarm the scene. It also stops responders from getting to the scene if everyone goes there. So, and I'll tie this back to Magic in a little while, but if everyone is getting there, that doesn't need to be there, it stops the people who kind of can do something from getting there, which is not what we want to see. One way and one tool that localities have come up with, or actually there's two things that localities have come up with to really help citizens become more empowered. There's the Citizen Corps, and that is a program kind of enacted by FEMA. And it's a program made up of a bunch of different kind of smaller programs. The biggest one is known as the Community Emergency Response Team. And that program, also called CERT, gives you typically about 2 weekends worth of training. And that covers everything from how to apply a tourniquet and other basic first aid to how to kind of do some basic search and rescue in your neighborhood, and how to use a fire extinguisher. It's pretty amazing how many, on my volunteer firefighter side, how many adults I run into that don't know how to use a fire extinguisher.
Yeah,
please go watch a YouTube video on how to run a fire extinguisher.
Yeah. It seems like a good way to have a little bit of preparation.
Just to have, realize you have to pull the pin out.
Yeah.
Right.
I get to a fire and people are holding the fire extinguisher with the pin still in. They're like, I was trying to squeeze it, it wasn't going anywhere. And I'm like, oh boy. But there's also in the Citizen Corps, there's Fire Corps, there's Citizen Police Academy, which kind of is your neighborhood watch type groups. There's RACES, which is the Radio Amateur Civil Emergency Services. So your ham radio operators. And they set up emergency communications during a disaster when a lot of our other kind of typical communications go down. So those types of things kind of give people a lot of control during disasters.
Well, and I was going to say, just sort of on that note, that it sounds like, even as you were talking about, parents not wanting to flood, trying to say, don't flood the scene, even if you, you're concerned, yes, that's understandable, but don't flood the scene. It sounds like, excuse me, that part of that is, you don't want to add to the addition, you don't want to add to the already present, stress that you're feeling with more stress. So finding those ways of controlling the situation seem to be one of the best ways that you can handle this stuff.
Yeah, don't make a secondary disaster is what we say in emergency management. So we try to give people ways to kind of control their anxieties and make useful I don't want to say usefulness of themselves, but make useful outlets for their anxieties. Like, I grew up in this world, so like this is the one thing in my life I'm not anxious about. But like, I am terribly anxious about school preparation. So like that I have like books by my side, and I'm always like checking my school email and all that kind of stuff. But my teachers have tried to give me useful ways to outlet that energy. So like this is just my teacher's way of helping the rest of the population in my world.
Right.
The other thing that I really want to mention that a lot of people don't realize is out there that's really important. It came about in the 80s. So it's older than I am, which I always like rubbing in people's faces because the guys who run it are always these really old guys, and they're like, back in my day, and I'm like, I wasn't born. Are the local emergency planning commissions, and almost every community has one. Because almost every community has a dangerous chemical either being transported through it or being produced in it or being held within it. These were created due to the Emergency Planning Community Right to Know Act of 1986. You get to know a lot of laws through this.
Yeah.
So these planning commissions have to have some citizen representation. They cannot just consist of the chemical company and government.
So that there's some sort of transparency with the public on that.
Yes, and the citizenry actually gets notification once a year about their existence, or is supposed to. But a lot of that we're finding, because these older individuals are running them, is through newspapers.
Oh.
It's not necessarily through mediums that people of, even Gen X, millennials, what are the ones after the millennials? God, now I sound old. The I generation or Zs or whatever they are.
I've heard those both. I don't know the actual definitions, but if we just make a big list.
Yeah. The
helpful.
ones that were born from like 95 on forward that are adults now.
That's a weird thought.
Isn't it though? You can hook into that typically through your local emergency management office, which is another way to kind of also get hooked into your CERT teams. You can find those guys typically on Facebook. A lot of times they maintain their own Facebooks. Not all of them have Twitters, or at worst, if you go to your local government's page or state government's page, and you can, and here's where it gets confusing. You can either type in CERT, S-E-R-T, or C-E-R-T, or you can type in CERC, S-E-R-C, and you will either get to the Community Emergency Response Team or the LEPC groups. So either way, you're going to get somewhere.
And those again are CERT or SERC?
Yes.
Okay.
I think that kind of like, that gives you a very broad overview of kind of a lot of the stuff.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
I would have, I guess I have one last question on this then, is if you were to give one recommendation, one nugget of advice to somebody who's saying, after listening to this, I'm concerned that I'm not concerned enough, about my emergency preparedness. What's one simple thing that somebody can do to just make themselves more prepared for those simple day-to-day emergencies? I say simple, but those more common day-to-day emergencies.
So FEMA has designed a really great website called ready.gov. And it's pretty universal worldwide. Like it was very United States centric for a while, and they realized that it was being referred to throughout the world, so they kind of more genericized it. It has on there a whole kind of outline of what to do. So it breaks it down very simply of be informed, plan ahead, and take action. One of the sections under plan ahead is to build a kit. And to me, that's kind of the most important ideas in emergency preparedness, is to have a kit for yourself. Because if you have to go to a shelter or you have to go to a friend's house during an emergency, they might not have everything you need. I know for certain my parents do not have the medication I need if I have to go somewhere. I know for certain if I have to go into work and work for 2 weeks straight at 12-hour shifts or 24 on, 24 off, they aren't going to have my medication. So my medication and my prescription number are written on a piece of paper that is kept in a bag so that it's ready to go with me and I can order refills that can be delivered to me at work if I need them. For more basic things, there's also like how much water you need a day per person in addition to pets for both water and sanitation needs. What kind of like weather radios would be good for all hazards type stuff, because there are certain bands of radio channels that will work almost regardless of what happens. Kind of what you might need beyond that basic stuff. So we tell people if they're evacuating due to a hurricane to take their important documents like their deed to their house or insurance documentations, social security cards, anything like that. That way they can start the recovery process faster. So it kind of lists all of that out, and you can print it out and actually highlight what you think is most important, medium importance, and what you don't need at all. And then also write down other ideas and start to build that up. Some people just have it all in a backpack, which is great. And then they know where the other stuff is and they can just grab it and go. For instance, like all of my really important documentation is just in like a tiny little sealed container that my spouse can kind of grab and go on their own, since I won't be around more than most likely during an emergency. And that contains like our pet's vet's records and the house information, since now we have to worry about that. That was a new thing. We had to reevaluate the whole box because now we have a deed we had to worry about. So, you know, that was something huge, was like we had to think about like, okay, this is my bag to go to work for a disaster for multiple days or multiple weeks. What is your bag for here to go and take care of animals and a house and that kind of stuff? So it's all about your environment and your needs. The needs of some, like Hobbs with a kid that's like newborn, is going to have very different needs than somebody like who has a toddler who has somebody different than like a 10-year-old.
Right.
So they have to continuously reevaluate their go kits.
That's awesome. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And as I just am poking around this website, there's a lot of really easy to figure out headings for ready.gov. And, you know, it seems like pretty detailed stuff of like, hey, you know, involved in a flood, click here, you know, and we'll link that in the show notes. This seems like a really great resource.
Yeah, and we normally, you know, we like to have actionable advice in the episode, and I'd say that's some really good actionable advice right there.
Boom.
Yeah.
I try to be useful.
Appreciate it.
Speaking of useful, let's talk about some useful tips and what we are in what we're seeing is the disaster unfolds in the middle of Ravnica's burgeoning war of the spark. We've just started getting previews only 4 days ago, and things don't look good for our friends here on the city plane of Ravnica. Alex, do you want to sort of talk us through what we're seeing in terms of what's happened to one of the most beloved planes of Magic?
Yeah, well, I mean, and everything all started off at PAX, and they did as they usually do at PAX, especially PAX East. They had a big panel talking about the set, but they started it off with the trailer for the set, which, there was a lot going on. If you have not seen it, I think just YouTube War of the Spark. We get to see Liliana mostly in focus, but a few other people who are present, and definitely a city that is not in good shape after Bolas shows up. So we've got, from the story standpoint, the last couple of years, most of the sets have tied into Bolas's big plans, and for years he was kind of in the background. He was doing stuff with Alara, he was doing stuff here and there. But now this new plan is coming to fruition. So he was in Ixalan, getting the Eternal Sun. Was in Amonkhet, getting an army of Eternals. We got Tezzeret, who was in Kaladesh, getting a planar portal. And I mean, you add those three ingredients together, and apparently it equals invade Ravnica. So we've got Bolas marching an army of Eternals into Ravnica and setting up a Planeswalker trap.
Yeah,
I think that's what we're seeing on the cards, and like it's been really, really cool, the way that they're doing the spoiler season this time around, where they're gonna just show all the cards, which is normal, but usually it's like, okay, we're gonna show a bunch, and then the week before the pre-release, here's the rest, just the rest of the set. Go look at it if you care. But now they're very intentionally releasing waves to tell the story as these weeks go on. And the early story doesn't look good.
Yeah, and so I think the first card that we saw in terms of sort of depicting this disaster unfolding was Emergence Zone, which is the uncommon land that it just creates colorless, but its special ability is tap 1, tap it, sacrifice Emergence Zone. You may cast spells this turn as though they had flash. Cool, stuff flashes in, except for that's the planar portal opening right in the middle of where the Chamber of the Guild Pact used to be, in the heart of Precinct 9.
And to Amonkhet.
Yep.
Yeah, you can see them Bolas horns in the background.
With the sun.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's a bit ominous there. So, Renee, talk us through maybe like what if we were down at ground zero of this incident happening in precinct 9, like what is going on with these people? Probably like what is the Ravnican disaster response?
Nothing good. Like, this is what we call a bad day.
Yeah.
We're so this
in the event of a zombie invasion led by a mad dragon, how do you respond?
So we actually have zombie response plans because they make really good pandemic exercises.
Oh, that's cool.
So like, that's not the problem here. The problem is the portal. That's where the problem comes in. The zombies are fine. I know how to handle the zombies. The portal is the issue.
Things you don't expect to hear when talking about disaster management.
This is why podcasting in this community is amazing. just as a quick...
I mean, I'm going to be asking for some USAR, which is Urban Search and Rescue teams, for sure. Preferably Type 1, which is how we actually rank things in the United States. So I want the best of the best. Honestly, those are probably either going to come from Celestia or Gruul, because they're the ones with the animals that can actually hunt and find people from rubble.
Okay. What about
I have this seriously thought out.
What if we get you something like 36 planeswalkers? Does that sound like a good search and rescue team?
No,
Fair.
that sounds like a wild card of unknown magnitude. Because who knows what those planeswalkers' goals are? Like, they're coming from all over the place through this planar bridge. Like, potentially, especially this guy with horns.
Right.
That's a good. So it's like you're all focused on the zombies. You're like, no, the problems are the portals and all these planeswalkers from God knows where.
Like, I am a big root cause analysis type person. The cause of the zombies seems to be the portal. So maybe we should plan to take care of the portal. Like, I feel like this erratic visionary dude and I have a lot of things in common. Because I feel like he's standing from the top going, aha, the zombies seem to all be walking from the portal. Let's take care of that. I might be wrong, though.
I do like that. Well, and I think an interesting card, and you mentioned this in our pre-show prep, Alex, but the Rising Populace card. This is the human this is awesome design, first of all, but whenever another creature or planeswalker you control dies, put a +1/+1 counter on it. And in this image, we see that was illustrated by Tomasz, I'm going to mispronounce the last name, sorry, Jedrzejczyk, I think. He illustrated this crowd of people with images of their loved ones or their guild leaders or whoever, sort of mobbed together and just looking for the people that were lost. And I think this is a really incredible image because it kind of shows that sense of these people are the ones being affected. Like this story seems to concern planeswalkers and it's about, this big war and all this stuff, but no one's really remembering that it's people involved, There's not a disaster response team that's helping make sure these people get out of the way and get to safety. Yeah.
And that's a thing I think that gets missed in fiction a lot. They like to, focus on the big set pieces with your superheroes or your whatevers doing the big things and fighting the big disaster, fighting the big enemies. And a lot of times you miss out on what's actually happening to the city and who are the people that are getting caught in the middle of all this. It's and I think they're from what we've seen, because as you've said, Joe, we're seeing as we're recording this, we've only seen a few days worth of cards coming out, but it looks like there is going to be some look at the citizenry, some look at the common folk who are caught in this, and some of these other things that are going on. But it's also a Teferi card and has one of my favorite flavor texts of the set so far. But Teferi's Time Twist exiles a creature, brings it back, which is kind of a neat, like, we're going to protect you, which really is something he did during the invasion, which short-term helped out, long-term has led to problems. But the flavor text, the safest place for you is not now. I love a good turn of phrase, and when he can take time terminology and turn it, referring to it as a place, it's a uniquely Teferi thing, at least in the realm of Magic, and I enjoy that.
Absolutely. Let's sort of fast forward through this event, and let's assume that there's a Ravnica after this to rebuild from and rejuvenate, and or even maybe sort of as this event goes on. Renee, I know that you said you thought about this a lot. So what guilds would be involved sort of in the disaster response teams? You said search and rescue is probably going to be Selesnya, Gruul sort of endeavor. What's the next phase, and who is sort of jumps in to help out with that?
So everyone kind of has a lot of differing roles, which is very typical. Your Azorius group and Orzhov group, they're your regulators, if you look at it like that. They're your guys who are actually writing the plan, code enforcement. If you think
it's like
about
standards sort of thing.
Yeah, building codes. all of that sort of thing. So that's important both before the disaster, although nobody kind of plans for a portal opening up on it. That's a little beyond just anything. That's like physics not found. 404 physics not found. But and then afterwards, like, how do we improve the codes so that they kind of have to come together and actually work as a team? And I have a feeling that they do that kind of naturally already, because I wouldn't be surprised if you have a couple of Orzhov people sitting in there with the Azorius people during code enforcement, like slipping things through and, through the pay system instead of the actual code enforcement system.
Just getting their bureaucracy on.
Yeah. They both like bureaucracy. They just like different sections of it. Your Boros individuals are your law enforcement. Like, that's kind of a given. But I have a feeling they'd also be your firefighters. Same with your Rakdos kind of guys. They're kind of your crazy individuals, and I'm not going to lie, a lot of us firefighter people are kind of crazy individuals. It takes a certain level of crazy to go running when everybody else is going the other direction. So, that's just a thing. So that a lot of these share a color, if you see. You have Golgari is kind of this interesting thing because they do a lot and they kind of do it solitarily, where they're your public works department as far as a water, sanitation, sewage. Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if maybe they help some Izzet people with electricity through water pumping.
Okay.
However, they also are kind of your biological specimens specialists.
Oh, sure.
Where they're kind of your epidemiologists. So if, like, you have a zombie outbreak, they're kind of the people you want to know what's going on.
Yeah, that I could see them be called in on the zombie invasion plan.
So,
if there's sort of a chemical pandemic, they're the experts.
Yeah, and you know what? If we on the planet Earth have zombie plans in place, I guarantee there's a zombie invasion plan on Ravnica.
Exactly.
We might even be surprised. There might be intergalactic portal plus zombie invasion plan.
There very well may be.
We have such little faith.
You never know. We'll find out as the story comes out.
Like, we have Storev down here, and I'm really kind of curious as to what his like angle is, because it's like, are you getting ready to eat these other random zombie guys, or like turn them into your style of zombie, because they are totally currently not your style of zombie. Like, they're all armored zombie, and you're just completely natural zombie. So I think there's an angle there where he's like, no, that zombie's gotta go.
Yeah.
Zombie is not okay.
Not my
This
friend.
zombie. Oh, this zombie is an invasive species kind of thing.
Yeah. Exactly. Who haven't we covered? We haven't covered Gruul. So Gruul is actually your wildlife. In addition to, like, your search and rescue kind of thing, they're also kind of your people who handle all of your, like, wildfire and land management, and they do good. They understand how the wildlife works and how everything kind of interacts. They also do a lot of really good work on the other end of biology, where they recognize where issues with, like, rabies or whatever Ravnica's version of, like, mad cow disease or anything like that would be. Like, they know the signs and symptoms of what's going on and could quarantine that population and, like, make the rest of everything safe for Ravnicans to eat because they've got to eat something.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
I could see that. I also now I have a picture of some gruel, like, animal control person, like, in my head.
Yeah.
They're like, damn it, I got raccoons in the backyard. Call the gruel to come recruit these raccoons. And then
recruit them.
They just come pick them
This
up.
is only funnier because I have a D&D character who is, like, totally gruel in nature, who has a dire raccoon as a animal familiar named Mushroom.
Jeez.
That's really
incredible.
That's great.
And then Celestia is like they're your happy planners. They want to bring everyone together and kind of they're the peace accord people. Like, they understand how the weather patterns go, and they want to make sure everyone's safe. And I'm pretty sure they're sending out reports to everyone to be like, oh, well, the Mad Celestia isn't happy right now, so you can expect rain at the later end of the week. And maybe they're like Ravnica's version of the Farmer's Almanac.
Nice.
I have Trevor, like, laughing in the background now at that one. I did good there.
I think Simic is one we haven't covered.
Simic is your other water guys, like, kind of. I mean,
yeah,
but they're also your other. So they're weird because they're the epidemiologists in the lab.
Oh yeah,
okay,
yeah, even more than the Golgari.
Yeah, it's.
The Golgari are the ones who are out there taking the samples and getting dirty, and the Simic guys are the ones in the lab testing everything. They're also probably the ones, like, actually doing exercises along with the Izzet. So, like, they're coming up with the crazy ideas of how to get everyone to do everything and test what they're doing.
Okay.
So it's like, all right, we've all got this plan now. We've all experienced the portal coming down on us. How do we prepare for the next portal?
Yeah.
This is how we're going to do it. This is the crazy idea. Let's go.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah.
Yep.
That makes a lot of sense.
And the Simic are like your FBI and CIA guys.
Yep.
So, like, there's actually when I am activated during an event and I sit in the planning section, typically, right now in my role, I'm typically a planning section chief. But there is an intelligence unit underneath of me that is typically made up of our fusion center, which is it's a state-run kind of thing, but it's meant to communicate with FBI counterparts, other federal kind of intelligence agencies, other state-level intelligence agencies in the area. This is really important for, like, active shooter type situations, planar collapses that are bringing zombies. Just run-of-the-mill
really
kind of
hung
stuff.
up on me.
Really Actually, like, I just suddenly, like, stumbled onto Invade the City as a card. And I'm like, this is very obvious that the zombies are coming from the planar portal. Like, sorry, guys. We're addressing the wrong issue here.
I think this is the big concern, is that you're not on the ground right now in Ravnica helping coordinate.
Where is my
to take
spark
some
wizards?
That's our show. You can find the podcast at Goblin Lore Pod on Twitter, or email any questions, comments, or concerns to goblinlorepodcast@gmail.com. If you'd like to support your friendly neighborhood gob-slugs, you can do so at patreon.com/goblinlorepod. This episode of Goblin Lore was hosted by Joe Rediman, who you can find on Twitter at Fyndhorn. That's Fynd Horn. This episode is written and co-hosted by Alex Newman, who you can find on Twitter at AlexanderNewM. Engineering, editing, and production for this episode also by Joe Rediman. Renee can be found on Twitter at MTGRayUnicorn. That's MTGREI Unicorn. Our music is by Wintergatten, who you can find at wintergatten.com. That's Winter, G-A-T-A-N. Logo by Stephen Raphael on Twitter at Stephen Raffle. Goblin Lore is presented by Hipsters of the Coast, which you can find at hipstersofthecoast.com. Thank you all for listening, and remember, goblins, like snowflakes, are only dangerous in numbers.